we were talking at the beginning of the week on how the Dominion lawsuit has really exposed what a sham operation Fox News is. I mean, we can all say we knew this, which is true. But I mean, this is like stuff like where Tucker Carlson's worried about the stock dropping because one of its reporters is criticizing Donald Trump, fact-checking Donald Trump, where it becomes evident that everybody knew that they were pushing just absolute bullshit.
Yeah, Tucker's agreeing with the sentiments espoused by the fact-checking behind the scenes and then getting really angry over text while because someone's saying it publicly because it's hurting Fox's stock.
Exactly. And also, this is also an enterprise that literally gave information on like advertising and debate strategies over to a rival campaign. If you were worried about misinformation in the media, certainly you would have to be upset at people who are like pushing Havana Gate or whatever. Was that what it was called?
Yeah, Havana Syndrome.
Havana Syndrome,
which the CIA found was not a real thing.
It was weird how they got ahead of even like the CIA on this. But and aspects of like the Russian conspiracy. If you were upset about those things, which I think is like, a perfect media critique, without a doubt. Certainly at the time, I think we didn't weigh too heavily into it, but certainly would mock how much Russia was on MSNBC for that matter. I don't know. I didn't really watch any other stations at that time. But with that said, and of course there are aspects of it. I mean, much of, or I should say, significant portions of that thing were true. Certainly it dominated the news. But if you were really critiquing, if it was for you was about media critique, to look at Fox News and see this as anything other than there's two things. There's two arguments. One is, yes, it is completely ideologically driven that they're lying. But it's also just like full-on scam. Like just full-on scam for money. It's just that the balancing act they have is scam for money, ideological agenda. And for the most part, they can maintain both those things are, aligned. But here's an amazing thing. The data shows that Fox News viewers get their news almost exclusively from Fox News. And to the extent that they get outside of the specific bubble of Fox News, it's like Levin or Ingram or Hannity on the radio who are espousing the exact same thing as Fox News is.
Yeah.
Whereas like people who watch, let's say CNN or MSNBC or listen to this show, they have like 4 sources of news or 5 or more.
And they're more likely to read, publications like the New York Times, which, yeah, they have ideological tilts sometimes, but they're still much more tethered to investigative reporting and reporting standards.
But the point being, that even if these aren't quality publications, they're not aligned in terms of messaging.
Yeah.
And so you hear different sides to it. On Fox News, they're in a hermetically sealed bubble. This is just to the extent that there's any data that exists on this, and there's, significant data, that's just a fact. So when they don't talk about this lawsuit and report on it, their viewers are never, ever, like literally are never going to know. And now that you don't have OAN and the other ones like
Newsmax,
right. you don't get that information as much because again, all these people need to suck up to Fox. Here's the one tiny slice, and this happened on Sunday afternoon when probably nobody's watching television. And Howard Kurtz, who I barely even remember that he's still on there. He's not looking good these days. Looking a little different. I don't know. It's weird.
Age.
Yeah, I guess it happens. But here he is, where he's basically was allowed to tell people one time that he's not allowed to talk about it.
Some of you have been asking why I'm not covering the Dominion voting machines lawsuit against Fox involving the unproven claims of election fraud in 2020, and it's absolutely a fair question. I believe I should be covering it. It's a major media story, given my role here at Fox. But the company has decided that as part of the organization being sued, I can't talk about it or write about it, at least for now. I strongly disagree with that decision, but as an employee, I have to abide by it. And if that changes, I'll let you know.
Okay. So this is, I mean, there's so much here, but it's not a major media news story. It is arguably the biggest media news story we've had, at least for, I don't know, months and months and months.
And some people might say, well, isn't that kind of standard? Isn't that a practice that a media organization might undergo? That's not necessarily true. For the most part, like I can remember New York Times in the very recent history, their workers went on strike and were trying to get higher wages, and there was a conflict with the union. They had a write-up on that in the New York Times, for
it's
example.
not true at all.
Right. But someone who doesn't necessarily follow this in the weeds might think that, but it's just, that's actually not best practices for a news organization at all.
And so good for Howard Kurtz for at least, mentioning it. It's the one time he can mention it. It wouldn't in any way impact the lawsuit. It would be just reporting. This guy's not going out there and doing like his own gumshoe reporting. He's just going out and reporting what's being reported, essentially.
Yeah.
Like he does like what we do. I mean, it does what he does. It's not a bad thing. I mean, he's the media reporter. I mean, that's what he does. But it is amazing how hermetically sealed they are. And that's why this is not going to influence them. And Tucker Carlson, and I've mentioned this before, in 1999, he wrote a book. I think it was in 1999. And he was on C-SPAN, expanding on it. And part of it was critiquing Bill O'Reilly. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's almost a quote. He said, Bill O'Reilly pretends like he's the everyman. And at one point, it's going to collapse on him. Because at one point, the story's going to come out about how he said to a waitress, I want, more champagne in my mimosa. Or he's going to come out how he's yelled at a waiter.
Caviar is too salty.
Something like that. But he literally said the mimosa thing. But he said something else. I mean, I'm not making this up.
Wow.
And he said, and it's all going to fall apart. And I'm convinced that Tucker Carlson came to understand that, wait a second, no, it never fell apart for Bill O'Reilly. I mean, what fell apart for Bill O'Reilly was the multi millions of dollars that they had to pay out to people who complained about his sexual harassment. That wasn't something that Carlson speculated on. But the whole thing about pretending, pulling the wool over the eyes of the Fox audience, Carlson thought that was going to ultimately catch up with Bill O'Reilly. And I think at one point over the past 20 years or 15 years that followed that, he began to understand, no, they're never going to catch up on that. And that has been his entire sort of like career understanding moving forward. And it's Fox's now as well.